Do you know? Did I tell you the theory why they went extinct? There's a few of them, but
you did tell me one about throwing things.
yeah, they don't have because their shoulders. They're like monkeys. They don't go high enough. Not monkeys. They're like some kinds of apes. Anyways, they can't like raise.
They
their
can only
arm.
lob. They
Yeah,
can't
chuck.
throw.
So it's like humans just threw rocks and killed them all, which is probably not true because there's a lot of interbreeding. So there was probably peaceful relations, right?
Right.
But there was probably an instance where they killed him because if a Neanderthal got up to you, he could probably kill you with his bare hands. I don't know how to.
I mean, I think if most people came up to me, they could probably kill me with their bare hands.
No, but I
I'm
mean,
not the
like
most strong out
like,
there.
My teacher gave us an example in class. It was like, oh, hypothetically, if one was alive today, they could chuck like a football, and it was some crazy distance.
Damn.
Or not throw a football, but like if they could throw, I guess.
Right.
Or like they could crush like something with their bare hands and stuff, and it's interesting. It's like how like imagine like a gorilla basically, but a human with like the intelligence of a human.
A gorilla, but a human.
Well, a gorilla, but like smart like a
No, I mean because he's like shorter and he's like wider build, right?
Yeah,
like,
big brow.
Big brow.
More resistant to head trauma.
I
Probably.
can tell I have a certain percentage. I got the.
Well, almost all of us
have
have Neanderthals. There's probably no pure Homo sapien in the world, but but there was 3 species of humans alive at the same time. There's also the really short, like the Devonian.
I forget what the other ones are. It's the one were they living in Indonesia or
in
something?
the islands, yeah, in the Pacific and Indonesia.
Which I was like, I don't know anything about them because Neanderthals like were taught about, but those were not.
Because we don't know a whole lot. There's very few like skeletal remains of them. So,
but I do think it's interesting because then are there like more that we just don't have any evidence of?
probably, honestly, there's a good chance there's many more.
Yeah.
It's like there's probably species we don't know about. But Neanderthals too is because they had an organ, like they buried their dead. You know, they left behind tools and fire and stuff.
They're
so
close enough to us.
Yeah.
In a cultural sense.
Culturally, the Neanderthals.
What do you know about Chinese Civil War?
I know it was very messy, and that there was principally the communists and then the like central government, so like the Republic of China, or the KMT,
or the GMD,
the one of the acronyms,
the anglicization of Chinese Mandarin words.
But yeah, I know it was very messy. There was a lot of warlords and a whole lot of competing interests.
Exactly, that is true. And you say that the communists were the principal; they're the ones who were the victors, but for the longest time they weren't actually seen as viable, even by the Soviets.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. No. Then they only kind of become relevant, like during World War II.
Well, it was slightly before
because it's the Long March, right?
Yeah, the Long March was. Well, I mean, the start of World War II is kind of a nebulous thing, but
World War II in China, so 37.
Yeah. Right, but I asked because that's going to be relevant for today. Hello, everybody. This is the We Weren't There podcast hosted by Ben.
And
otherwise,
Max.
Yeah, and Max, sorry. Although I'm also known as Schrodinger's Moose on YouTube because I make more edited, scripted stuff than this. This is my first foray into presenting a historical topic with notes, but not necessarily scripted, which... Thank you for starting first because...
Oh, no worries.
I'm a little nervous, if I'll be honest.
No, it is. I'm sure it's going to go well.
I'm sure it is going to go well. I think I got enough notes here that mostly like some quotes.
Looks like you can rival my Tiberius notes.
Yeah, a lot of it is copy-paste, though, because I had one... I'll just shout out the book that I'm using for today, which I have here. It's... so you can judge the accuracy of it. As far as I'm aware, they use it very well. It's 2016, a fairly newer book. It's The Making of China's War with Japan. Zhou Enlai and Zhang put Zhang Xueliang in there. And, that's what we're going to talk about is Zhang Xueliang, who's a very not well-known. I don't know how well-known he is in China, because...
Like I said, that's what I was going to ask. Is he, like, well-known?
I wish I could speak to that, but I'm not very familiar with the current, People's Republic of China's education system in terms of history. I know they're very familiar with Zhou Enlai, because he's a very influential early communist leader.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was the first premier of the People's Republic of China. And like he filled also different positions. He was like foreign minister at one point, and like vice chairman, a bunch of positions. Communists love their bureaucratic names and positions like that. But Zhang Xueliang, definitely outside of China, when people know anything about the Chinese Civil War, which is unfortunately very little, because I think that's a good place to start. I mean, what is your experience with learning about the Chinese Civil War?
Like in school?
Well, in school, outside of school, just like as Eastern Coast Canadians, Quebecois, all that stuff. We don't get exposed to Asian history all that much.
No, not really.
At least until the bomb. The bombs, at least.
Even then, like, it's always because it's very Quebec-centric, and we didn't...
Yeah, because for me, I lived in Hawaii for a few years. So we went through American history, and being in the Pacific Ocean, learning about American history, the influence of, let's say, like Chinese immigration, Japanese immigration,
World War II,
all that is kind of fairly explored. But I've been through history education here, and there's like no exposure to that at all.
I would say for the, like, we do learn about, you know, the railroad and the Chinese immigrants and their influence on, like, kind of Canadian society. But in terms of the Chinese Civil War, I think I knew about it in passing because I've had an interest in history and I've read about World War II. But, like, I would say I had very, very limited knowledge until probably CEGEP, because when I took my World War II history class,
which is basically college.
Yeah. We dived into that a little more. Even then, it was a class about fascism, so it was sort of a side note to more. Yeah. We focus more on Japan, but we do get like a brief, like the communists and
like context,
which is basically the communists and the central government were trying to fight each other, and there's a whole lot of warlords. That's the entirety of my knowledge prior to.
To be fair, I think in terms of a regular working person's need to know. That is generally all they need to know, is that there were a lot of warlords, there were a lot of competing interests. Chiang Kai-shek was there.
Oh, yes, I know him. And Mao.
And Mao won.
And they stopped fighting during the World War II.
Yes.
Mostly. I'm going to assume there was sporadic. I don't actually have no idea.
We're going to get to that. But we are going to get to that.
They kind of frame it as, okay, we're going to put aside our differences to fight back the Japanese.
We'll talk about that.
Which I imagine is a gross oversimplification.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that because the Chinese Civil War is such a mess, it is very difficult to explain it in, let's say, an hour, which I think at this point is generally what we're aiming for, is an hour for these podcasts. It's very difficult to break these down into that, especially when it comes to the Chinese Civil War, because the Chinese Civil War, if I remember correctly, lasts from like early 1910s to 1949. Which is like 40 years. Obviously, there was World War II in which things were different. Again, you said that they came together to fight the Japanese, which, yes, asterisk. Big asterisk. Big asterisk, which, again, we'll get to. But that I still consider that active civil war, like that whole period.
It's not a truce. It's not a ceasefire, really. Yes and no.
Not a formal one, as far as I'm aware. But again, we'll get to that. But there's a lot of competing interests, and we know the end result, which is, you know, the communists are on top. Right. The People's Republic of China is established. Taiwan is where the rest of the Kuomintang, the sources I read, at least my teachers who taught me about this history before I also used other sources, use Kuomintang as the anglicization of the Nationalist Party in Taiwan. So we tend to focus a lot on those two sides.
Right.
And especially the Kuomintang was, throughout most of it, a very influential force, because that was, they were part of the original revolution that deposed the Qing dynasty, and Sun Yat-sen, being a very influential figure, was the founder of that party and worked for a long time to get the Qing dynasty deposed. But the communists, especially from the beginning, were not, like, if you're a betting man, you would not think that they would have won.
They're okay.
Yeah, which I think you can say about most communist movements by this point.
Yeah, that's actually a fair assessment.
Especially, like, let's say, like, the Soviets, for example. Like, if you say, the Soviets, because there's a bunch of different people. The Bolsheviks.
Specifically, yeah, because the Decembrists and the Mensheviks.
Yeah, which I think you're probably more familiar with that.
Yeah, I have more knowledge on the Russian Civil War.
How much do you know about the Russian Civil War? Let's go into detail about that. But if anything, that's actually a very good example of the complicated nature of this. Obviously, not at all the same kind of conflict, but the Russian Civil War is also a convoluted mess with a bunch of different agents. Though from the outset of at least the Civil War part of the Russian Revolution, you know, it was clear that the communists, the Bolsheviks, were one of the contenders for supremacy over Russia.
Then who would you say were the main prior to, like, at the beginning of the Civil War? Who were the main?
I'd say if you were a betting man in the beginning, you'd think the Kuomintang would win.
But who were they opposing, like, primarily?
They were opposing the warlords.
Okay.
Which
I'll take it, are not a unified group?
Yes and no. No. Well, I mean, yes and no. No, they aren't. But they do work together in the common interest of
Warlordism?
keeping warlordism, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
They have this thing called the Beiyang government,
Mhm.
which is basically like the most powerful warlord would basically take. They called it, I think, like generalissimo is like
Interesting.
is like the head of the largest army and is the most powerful warlord who would have a lot of influence over the other warlords.
Right.
Just through pure like military might,
Mhm.
but they didn't act like as a president. It wasn't a democracy, obviously.
No,
but also
it's not,
there was no like establishing national policy. It's so difficult to describe because it's so kind of foreign to us. Not just being in a liberal democracy, but in a stable nation state, which at that time it really wasn't. So I think in order to really get to the bottom of this, talk about Zhang Xueliang and why he's such an interesting figure and why he's considered kind of a hero, but still not a very well-known one. And
Mhm.
I think he'd actually prefer it that way, at least according to his interviews, which obviously take those with a grain of salt. But to begin with, let's just get started with, let's say, I think it was early 1910s, the first revolution, the one to depose the Qing dynasty.
Right.
So to gravely oversimplify, because this is just to set the stage for Zhang Zhuolin, who is Zhang Xueliang's father and was one of these warlords, actually. Sun Yat-sen, he works outside of China. I think he's exiled at one point. He becomes a doctor. He sets up an organization that operates mainly in Japan, but in other places as well, including in the U.S., to depose the Qing dynasty because the Qing dynasty isn't doing so hot. I mean, I'm sure you've heard, the unequal treaties, the century of humiliation, all that stuff.
Opium Wars.
Opium Wars is where it starts, but eventually, Italy, Germany, Japan, Russia, England, France, they all carve their own little pieces out of China, not necessarily annexing, but
Like treaty
spheres
ports.
of influence, as they'd call it, but also just different like administrative regions, like even just France in Indochina has just general influence in southern China just because of their position there. But with all the situation, while obviously there's a recognition that it's the foreign invaders that are the problem, the Boxer Rebellion occurs because of that. There's also recognition that the Qing dynasty is not helping. It's not a great administrative force to fight against these empires for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons, I think, is because at the time, Empress Dowager Cixi, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Again, I'm not very familiar with Mandarin pronunciations, and again, these are all Anglicizations, so the names I say, please take them with a grain of salt. These are the best I can pronounce them, but generally should know who I'm talking about. Was fairly conservative, not very open to reforms, and the dominant factions were not open to reforms, which in a time when so much is changing around you isn't the best look. It really isn't. And conservatism hadn't been working. And then when Cixi and her nephew, the emperor at the time, both die, and then Puyi, who is a very young toddler, rises to power, people are like, all right, that's enough. And Sun Yat-sen and his party, along with the dominant military officials at the time, overthrow the Qing dynasty. So this includes a man named Yuan Shikai and other generals who would later become warlords. So the reason why I think this is important to understand is that these are Qing generals. They're generals under the imperial dynasty. So while, yes, there's a new Republic of China, democracy, quote unquote, these different parties and all that. The situation isn't actually great because while the dynasty isn't there, the army is still there. It's just moved from, the dynasty to military dictatorships, except a bunch of them everywhere, with Yuan Shikai supposedly being the head honcho, even though he finds it very difficult to actually execute on that. Even Yuan Shikai assassinates some of Sun Yat-sen's allies within the Kuomintang. So, there's beef. Let's just put it like that. But that's the state of affairs for a while until like 1916. Yuan Shikai is the head of the warlords, but his control over the other warlords is very not strong. And Sun Yat-sen and his Kuomintang are basically like, well, it's hard to argue the intentions.
Yeah.
He does seem genuinely committed to establishing a stable Chinese republic,
Yeah.
democratic one. He seems very committed to democracy specifically, which other warlords were not, being warlords.
I'm curious. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but because it's so fragmented, like if you asked a Chinese peasant, for instance, or someone, do you think they identify more with their warlord or the national identity?
Oh, the national identity for sure.
Oh, really?
Because it's not the first time that this happened. And also, there are a lot of parties here in China at the time whose goal is to unite China.
Okay.
The Qing dynasty is not that long ago. Again, it just disunited, but China as a culture has existed for millennia, right? It's split apart and then it's come back together. So while it has split apart now, Chinese people know Chinese history. This isn't the first time it's happened. People recognize that this is going to be, at least intellectuals, obviously. I can't say the peasants because that's another thing. It's difficult to know like what a peasant thinks.
I would wonder. But it might have been more of a level of, I'm more concerned with whoever's administering me because that's what affects my day-to-day life.
Exactly. And there's always changing interests. They want people who have their interests at heart to fulfill their interests, right? So, it's mostly students who kind of are ideological in that sense. They're the ones who join like the Communist Party. They're the ones who join the Kuomintang. But sorry?
I thought the Communist Party maybe this is later, I don't know, had a really large base of support with the peasants too, though, right?
That changes from
Later
time
on.
to time.
Okay.
That is also something that shifts because sometimes there is support, sometimes there isn't. Like in the later stages after World War II, at least according to my teacher, again, this isn't part of the research I did for this I don't know, lesson. It's not really a lesson, but a story episode. He explained to us that there was support, but mainly in opposition to Chiang Kai-shek.
Okay, it's more
because of his repressive policies, because of his inability to put aside ideological concerns for a united, like thriving China. Eventually, though, Mao Zedong would alienate a lot of peasants because of forced collectivization, because of his agricultural policy. I'm not here to say communism good or communism bad. It's evolving. Peasant politics is a very interesting subject that you all should learn more about, but it's constantly evolving. And at the time, peasants would most likely just be interested in which one could maintain a society where they could live and feed their children.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Especially in a period of civil war, especially a prolonged civil war, you just want a life.
Stability,
Stability, exactly. But anyway, at the beginning, Yuan Shikai, he actually proclaims himself emperor in 1915 and then dies a year later, so...
That's very short-lived.
Yeah, it doesn't really go anywhere. And the status quo is basically like that. A bunch of warlords, the Kuomintang, and the Chinese Party is founded at some point, though mostly within the Kuomintang. This is, in hindsight, this is called the First United Front, where it's the Chinese Communist Party and the Kuomintang working together to fight against warlords.
Okay.
Because Sun Yat-sen, especially in his later life, recognized the need for military. Okay. So there is territory, right? The Kuomintang mostly has territory in southern China, in the Guangdong territory. Guangdong? I'm just going to make sure I get that correctly. 1 second. Yeah, Guangdong. Guangdong and I think now we'll call it Guangxi. But it's in southern China, and the warlords have the northeast. They're in the west. Tibet forms an independent country. Mongolia also eventually becomes a puppet state of the Soviet Union, but that's a bit later. So it's a party that acts mostly within the Kuomintang because they're the ones who are for liberal democracy, and the Chinese Communist Party, especially at the time, believes that the formation of a democracy is kind of necessary, like a democracy in the Western tradition, because they really followed, again, a lot of different views within the Communist Party. Not all communists are the same, but generally, like, they thought that the creation of a democratic system, like in Britain or in the US and all that, was kind of necessary to then get to the stage where the communist utopia was possible.
Yeah, the very standard Marxist understanding of history. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was in their best interest. Not only that, but the Soviet Union supported the Kuomintang because they also saw them as the most likely people to establish a stable Chinese nation that was at least, if not, communist, because the party was not communist at all. It was not strictly anti-communist under Sun Yat-sen. However, that changes with Chiang Kai-shek, who becomes the next leader of the Kuomintang, which, again, that's complicated because he steps down 3 or 4 times and then comes back to power, sometimes forced out, sometimes retirement. Well, I mean, no, he was always forced out, basically, but he's not the consistent leader, but he's the only one we really need to know because he's the one who always comes back and stays until
the most influential, the one that
exactly. It's Chiang Kai-shek.
Yeah.
You've heard the name for a reason. I'm not going to pretend he's not as influential as he actually was. But the important thing with him, not only was he very much a military leader, which, to be fair, is what Sun Yat-sen wanted. He established, one of the last things he did, he established a military academy with Soviet support. And Chiang Kai-shek, being politically and military influential, he naturally, in this new status quo of warlordism, becomes the next leader. And he is very anti-communist. Very, very. I will not accept any communist elements within this new government that we're trying to do with this nationalist party. So, all the classic repression, killings, kidnappings, all that stuff. So, the Communist Party and the Kuomintang, no longer friends. The First United Front, again, which I don't know if this is more of a hindsight thing or if it's actually talked about at the time. I wouldn't be surprised if at the time the Chinese Communist Party wasn't powerful enough to really be we're equal partners in the struggle against warlordism, because it wasn't, right? But definitely there's a severing of allegiance there, and they end up having their own territory, Long March, all that. That's the Chinese Civil War in the beginning. What I want to focus on with Zhang Xueliang is the warlords, because this person we're talking about, again, this hero of China, was a warlord, specifically the son of a warlord, the warlord of Manchuria.
Interesting.
So, Zhang Xueliang, again, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, was the warlord in control of Manchuria, which, I was going to say fun fact. I don't know if this is a fun fact, but
it's a fact.
The Qing dynasty was of Manchu descent. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Which is one of the big, conflicts, especially in the beginning, was it's a Manchu people who are barbarians, who are the emperors of China.
Isn't that why the Japanese later on, they installed the child emperor?
Yeah, because there's a connection.
There's a connection and a sense of legitimacy.
Although it was also he was also the previous emperor of China, because as we'll establish, that wasn't important. They just took advantage of that fact.
Okay.
But this time it was a Han Chinese warlords in charge of Manchuria. So a reversal of fates here. A little bit of irony, yeah. Which I think it's ironic in a very surface level sense, but it is also important to mention that the Qing dynasty at one point stopped caring about Manchuria because they're a dynasty, and like a lot of Chinese dynasties, they felt a decadence, very interested in keeping their own power, the power of their family, the power of the nobility, all that stuff. But again, Zhang Xueliang is the warlord of Manchuria, and by 1927, he becomes basically where Yuan Shikai was. He becomes the most powerful among them, charge of the Northeastern Army, the Beiyang government, as they called it. He is recognized as the head of warlords generally, which again doesn't mean everybody listened to him. They didn't. He just happened to be the most powerful, the most influential. There were different cliques. They literally call them cliques within, warlord politics. Drama. I mean, sometimes reading it felt like it. He was in charge of the Fengtian clique. Not in charge. The Fengtian clique was the ones that supported him, and they were the most powerful. He also had support from the Japanese, because going back again, this is a very complicated story. You're familiar with the with the Russo-Japanese War.
Yes.
Right? Do you remember what it was about?
Actually, no. I know I know it happened. I know they fought.
Mm-hmm.
But was it about the land in Vladivostok in like?
I think
Or
that
what
was
it was called.
That was part. That might have been part of it, but
I have no idea.
that wasn't actually what it was
that's my
about.
educated guess.
It was about a railroad in Manchuria, the South Manchuria Railroad,
is it part of the?
and also two different ports. It was Port Arthur and one that I can't remember exactly, but it was infrastructure in Manchuria basically.
Okay.
Because Russia cares about warm water ports. That's like half of their history is trying to get to warm water ports, and so Russia had sets up some in Manchuria because Russia had been taking territory from Qing China for the longest time. Again, they were one of the powers that had unequal treaties, and Japan, who had just recently taken over Korea, taken over Taiwan, wanted control of this infrastructure, not only to get more resources for itself, but also basically to cut off the Russians, since the Japanese were allies with the British, and both of them were enemies against Russians. Those were their common enemy. Though also, Britain also entered an alliance in Japan to limit Japanese power, because the British didn't want the Japanese to threaten their power in Malaysia, or like the Pacific in general. There's a lot of politicking, realpolitik, but basically, Japan had not only interests, but administration over a lot of Manchurian infrastructure, and because of that, they generally had a lot of sway in Manchuria. They sent over like advisors to Xueliang, and there was a relationship there, basically. Which
did they participate in the Russo-Japanese War? The warlords, that is.
Well, that was before the warlord era. That was when the Qing dynasty was still in power.
Okay.
That was like 1905.
Okay.
Around. So that was like right before, and the Qing dynasty was very weak by that point. So they didn't really. Again, there was probably some involvement. It was on their territory after all, but it wasn't a decisive one.
Right.
They really just were like passively there while these two empires fought over administration of infrastructure within their own empire, which is representative of the situation at the time, right? But so Xueliang, who is Xueliang's son, is supposedly born the same day as Xueliang, like a great battle. Like there's this interview that he does later in life, because he lives to, was it like to 100, something like that? He lives he lives a very long time, and so he has a bunch of interviews like in like the 90s. I'm pretty sure. I think it was in the 90s.
Really?
Yeah, in the 90s.
Oh yeah. Did he still live in China, or was he in exile?
No. Well, we're gonna get to that. Eventually, he ends up living in Hawaii actually at some point, but that's a whole thing. There's a whole thing about his youth. He was involved with the YMCA. He was educated in like a military academy. Apparently he wanted to be a doctor at one point, but his dad was like, no, you're going to
be in the army.
Yeah, you're going to be my successor, all that stuff. The point is, he was basically a prince. Yeah. Like in all but name. He wasn't a prince in the sense that he wasn't royalty, but he was the son of one of the most powerful warlords in a territory that was uncontested under Zhang Xueliang.
He becomes the next warlord, basically.
Later on, but he's a very privileged youth, is what I'm trying to say. Like, he visits, like, Japan at one point, and apparently visits Japan in 1921, and I have a quote here. He realized, basically, again, these are all interviews that happen way after the fact.
Okay.
But according to him, during his visit to Japan, he said, quote, the Japanese were polite and kind, but I was not happy about the Japanese because they always tried to show off their power as if they were trying to subjugate the Chinese by their power. So, as if wasn't already obvious, just going to Japan made him realize, like, yeah, these Japanese will not let us go. Like,
right.
They have interest in China that they will not drop. Again, after the fact, obviously it's very easy to go like, oh, I always knew those people were going to do that. But I don't think I'll argue with this one, because considering their administration over railroads, over the ports, the interests were there.
Yeah.
So I have some notes here of, if I just read my notes here, Sun Yat-sen gets replaced by Chiang Kai-shek, strong anti-communist. Just one of my points.
Important
I also
to
have
note.
here fascist influence, including influential Blue Shirt Society, however not fully fascist. So the Blue Shirt Society was straight up fascist, but it was an influential part of the Kuomintang. Again, just explaining that they were very strong anti-communists.
So how does the warlord prince position himself in relation to the central government? Are they like they're in opposition, I imagine?
No, actually.
No.
So from the beginning, Xueliang claims that he's always been sympathetic to a united China by like any means, and not necessarily under himself. Like, and later on, his actions will kind of show that he's much more interested in uniting China. Obviously, he'd like to have a privileged position within it, but not necessarily as the leader. So, Chiang Kai-shek goes on his northern expedition in 1926, which the northern expedition was basically an effort by Chiang Kai-shek to unite all of China. Like basically end the Civil War. That was like his big offensive was he's going to go from south to the north to Manchuria. The west wasn't really a focus at that time, but the idea was later they'd go to the west. But for now, unite like the coastal areas.
Like all the warlords.
Get to Nanjing, get to Beijing, get to Manchuria, all that stuff. Exactly. Exterminate the warlords there before they get to the warlords to the west. The thing is, this was very much played up as like a strong offensive to destroy the warlords, when in fact a lot of it was bribing warlords. A lot of it was
the Great Unification War funded. I love that. So there was very little actual fighting then, or was it?
No, there was plenty of fighting. It's just that it was fighting where they'd align themselves with certain warlords to fight other warlords, and eventually they'd get to Beijing. But before they get to Beijing, or Beiyang, I think at the time. The cities changed names a lot at this time. But
would you say...
Sorry, continue.
I was going to say, would you say that the reason... I know this is like kind of an interpretation question. It's probably not got a clear answer, but would you say that the reason they went the whole bribery route was to avoid casualties, or because they didn't have the military force required to take them all on?
They didn't have the military force required to take them all on. At least that seems to be the impression I get. Not only that, but they also did have economic support from, say, the Soviet Union, and at one point the United States. It's mostly once World War II begins. But there is support. There is enough economic support that military, along with economic power, they thought would be a way to unite all of China. And it also does just seem better if there's less casualties generally. So I don't think that's not a factor. But it does seem like they also just want to take advantage of their economic situation, and also recognize the power of some warlords to take on other warlords would be a great way to end the conflict once and for all. Because the expedition ends in like 1928. So it's a very quick one. It's a very speedy one. He wants it to be quick. He doesn't want it to be like just more civil war forever. His whole thing is he's going to conquer it quick. He's a military man. He's going to instate this grand republic, all that stuff.
And does he succeed in conquering the warlords?
Yes and no. He succeeds in what the plan actually is, which is, again, bribing, getting people in support, and also getting to Beijing. But before he can get to Beijing, he also fights Zhang, right? Right. Because he's the warlord of Manchuria, but also a bit more territory down to Beijing. He's actually, again, in charge of the Beiyang government. So his territory stretches down there. He's a very large northeastern army. Unlike Xueliang, who I just said, seems genuinely interested in a united China, Zhang Xueliang wanted power. Like, he was a warlord. He's in
it for his
as
personal
far
gain.
as I am aware from the research I've done, he is just the warlord who's in it for himself, which, well, we wouldn't see exactly what that would amount to necessarily, because he also fought against the Kuomintang with Japanese support, which I presume is basically just the Japanese wishing for China to stay split apart so that
it's easier to conquer, and easier to influence.
Maybe not necessarily conquers. I don't think that was necessarily.
No, but to influence and to
to influence, divide and conquer. Not necessarily conquer, but that's how the phrase goes. If they're split up, if they're fighting among themselves, they're weak to anything that we do to them. But Zhang Xueliang doesn't exactly go along with everything that Japan wants them to do. Like, at one point, he's just stopped cooperating with the Japanese officials, so Japan just decides to... Okay. Another complication behind this whole series of events is that within Japan, there is also a mess. Because while China was territorially, militarily, all that stuff, all in a big jumbled mess of civil war, Japanese politics itself was a mess. Because Well, here's another question. How familiar are you with the state of Japanese politics before World War II?
I have practically no knowledge of that. All my knowledge is about their government during the war.
So a lot of the issues that came about, a lot of the militarism which came about during the Japanese conquests of East Asia is because the military and the Navy were basically independent from civilian government.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I'm sure you're at least familiar with that part. I think
the rivalry, inter-service rivalry.
There's the rivalry, but not just the rivalry. It's that they didn't listen to civilian government. But because of that, the civilian government basically had to justify everything the military did after the fact. So sometimes this was, like, at one point, I'll get to this later, but there's a coup against the civilian government to install a military government, which would happily do this. But before that, like, the prime minister and the foreign minister would scramble around, like, beg the military, like, please don't invade more of China. Please wait until we can, like, maybe get negotiations off the ground. And I would not wish being prime minister of Japan, of a civilian government wishing peace, on my worst enemy.
I swear, guys, we planned this all along. Okay, we ordered them to do that.
Exactly. It's yeah. So the army in Manchuria at the time, the one which is looking over the administration of the railroads, of the ports, is called the Kwantung Army. So when I say Japan does this in Manchuria, it is most likely the Kwantung Army does this, and Japan may or may not agree with it, especially in the early days. The prime minister and the foreign minister probably don't, but again, constantly evolving situation. So, again, getting back to the situation. So the Kwantung Army, one specific official decides to kill Xueliang. So not only the Kwantung Army, but one official who just really doesn't like Xueliang for not cooperating decides to kill him.
So to be clear, not only does the army not respond to the government, its own officers don't really respond to it.
Well, it's the attitude of officials there is that, you know, they can do whatever they want, and they're all doing it in the interest of the Kwantung Army of Japan. So whether or not this was generally agreed upon, you know, the Kwantung Army didn't like that Xueliang wasn't listening. It was just the idea of this one guy
to kill him. Okay.
Along with help of many other people, obviously. But still, this included bombing a train, which, because he was on a train, they would bomb the train, kill him, easy. And so, interesting story. In that same car with him was his Japanese advisor, Giga Seiya, who was almost killed in this attempt.
Oh my god.
Which was on purpose.
Oh, okay.
The specific official who wanted to kill Xueliang also didn't like his Japanese advisor.
My god.
So was not necessarily trying to kill him, but
you
didn't
know,
really care.
Whoa, it's like take it or leave it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, if he dies, he dies. You know, Rocky IV, all that. And another interesting fact, this almost started fighting between the Chinese and Japanese. However, the police commander near the scene, who would also take command of part of the army, I'm kind of unclear about how everything goes down, like, moment to moment. Mm-hmm. But basically, there's this guy named Huang Mu, who is a police commander in charge of the military. Again, police, military, not very different during a civil war, but takes command and to figure out what's going on. And this guy named Huang Mu is actually not Chinese. He's Japanese. Okay. And his actual name is Araki Goro. I'm not 100% sure why he's there, but apparently they just like reveal it in the book. We're like, by the way, he's actually Japanese.
I mean, let's be honest, it's such a mess that who knows? He could do
Yeah, who knows? But anyway, he's obviously on the Chinese side because he sees that Giga is injured and quote unquote indignant. And he apparently like immediately understands, crap, the Kwantung Army definitely did this so he could like spark a war, basically. And it's thanks to his help, along with other people realizing it and like quick negotiations trying to de-escalate the situation, that the invasion of Manchuria didn't happen in, I think this is like 1927. So a bunch of stuff happens, crazy shit. Zhang Xueliang isn't with his dad at this time. He's actually still in Beijing. His birthday is the next day.
How old is he at this point?
He's in his mid to late 20s.
Okay.
Again, I'm not going to give exact ages here, but he's in the mid to late 20s. And his birthday is the next day. And there's like quotes at the time of like officials going to his son's birthday and seeing him like happy and being like really confused. So they decide not to tell him.
Oh, jeez.
That is, I mean, they don't publicly announce it either.
Right.
But they also don't tell his son for like a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And then Xueliang basically goes into hiding, goes back to Manchuria, signs like documents in his dad's name for a while, and then eventually they publicly
announce that he's dead. Yeah.
He's dead. It's a whole fiasco, but now this mid to late 20s guy is now the warlord of Manchuria.
He's not just that, he's the warlord of all warlords, right?
He not really, because during this whole mess, Chiang Kai-shek went to Beijing. They basically gave it all up, and again, not only was he personally interested in unification of China, so far it doesn't seem like he's too interested in personal power, but also he wasn't in a position to really dictate.
But did that like I don't want to call it a government, but did that agreement still exist, or at this point did that kind of collapse with all the northeastern fighting?
Which agreement?
I can't remember the name, but the one where there's like a warlord king.
It's
there's the top dog warlord basically.
Basically, right after like all this happens, Chiang Kai-shek says asks Zhang Xueliang to change his flag, which is a very symbolic gesture for saying this is a new China under the Kuomintang.
Right.
Change your flag, work under me, all that stuff. It's not doesn't have much control. Basically, Chiang Kai-shek just becomes the new big dog.
But nominally, they're under the Republic of China. Even if practically, they're not.
Yeah, right. Like the international recognition of China is that Chiang Kai-shek is the leader of the government of China, the national government. The warlordism is kind of collapsing in favor of a new warlordism, like under Chiang Kai-shek.
Warlordism 2.
Yeah, so again, it's very complicated, but Chiang Kai-shek does unite Japan, quote unquote.
You mean China?
China, not Japan. Japan's still very united and is very much a big problem. But China is united under Chiang Kai-shek, and Xueliang is still Zhang Xueliang. I'll just say Zhang now because his dad's dead.
Yeah.
Zhang is still in charge of Manchuria. He still administers the territory because while he's under Chiang Kai-shek, Chiang Kai-shek doesn't exactly have the resources to go in and enforce his will in Manchuria specifically, especially because at the time it wasn't really like a manufacturing hub. It wasn't as important as, say, Beijing, Nanjing, Shanghai, all those places.
So would you say he's sort of like a provincial, like how much
he becomes like a provincial governor, but he's also has his own army.
Okay,
so he becomes like, if we compare it to Rome, like one of like the Roman.
He's almost like a protectorate or like I know it's complicated.
Almost like a tributary state.
I'm just trying to grasp.
It's the reason why when Japan invades Manchuria, people are very quick to specify he invades Manchuria, not China. They stop at Manchuria, and it can be justified because Manchuria is almost like a separate entity from China because it's administered differently. Japan also has just special interests in the area, so they can justify holding onto that land more than the rest of China, but it's just administered differently from the rest of China, which again, a lot of it is still under warlords. It's just that Chiang Kai-shek is nominally the leader of China.
I see.
And also the CCP is in Yan'an because during all this mess, there's the Communist Party has their own story, which I'm not going to get into because that would just add another complication. Right now, we just need to care about Chiang Kai-shek, the expedition, Manchuria.
But to be clear, the Communist Party was not their quote unquote warlord state or whatever wasn't subservient to the central government. They're like their own thing. Okay.
And they refused to participate because Chiang Kai-shek was very clearly anti-communist and very antagonistic as well. Like eventually, throughout all this, they have the anti-bandit like campaign. Which is what they call the communists.
Okay.
So they would end up in military engagements against the communists specifically. But that is a whole other dimension of this conflict. Right now we're talking about Zhang Xueliang, right?
Yes, Manchuria.
Zhang Xueliang, this whole story. Yes. Again, I got caught up on a lot of history, but we're talking about Zhang Xueliang, who is right now administering Manchuria. While he gives up the mantle as warlord of Manchuria, he still administers the territory.
Right.
And works on building new infrastructure. That's like the big thing he does in the late 20s, 1927, 1928, because Japan controls basically the only railroad which carries stuff around, and they're very strict about how it can be used. He's like, okay, well, let's create parallel lines so that the Chinese people, Chinese government officials can use that instead of relying on Japanese infrastructure.
When you say control, is it that it's owned by Japanese companies, or is it like Japanese lease to the government? Like,
no, it's like owned by the Japanese I don't know the specifics of how it's bureaucratically done, but the Japanese military is defending the railroad
and runs the line. Okay,
and runs the line.
So practically,
I don't know if it's like a crown corporation or whatever, whatever the bureaucratic setup is, but it's basically owned by the state.
Okay, so it's basically Japanese territory on the railway line.
Yes.
Okay.
As well as 2 ports
Mm-hmm.
in Manchuria. And so they start this process, 1927, 1928. Another question, what happens in 1929?
That's when they invade Manchuria, no?
Close, but
Korea?
what's globally happening?
29. Oh, the stock market crash.
Yeah, the Great Depression.
The Great Depression, yeah.
The Great Depression starts, which is bad for everyone.
Yeah.
Including Japan, including China. And like you said, that is also when Japan invades Manchuria, slightly, how was I say inspired, motivated by the economic collapse. And so when the Great Depression hits, there's a lot of freaking out because, the building of new infrastructure, Japan already relies on like a lot of stuff on the ports, on the railroad. All of a sudden, those are a lot less profitable. And Xueliang is working on making new railroads to make them less dependent on the Japanese stuff.
Right.
There's a lot of debate about how much Xueliang's policies actually mattered. Because Japan had a more national vision of, we're running out of stuff, let's conquer territory. It's very difficult to parse exactly what Xueliang
could have done to deter invasion, really.
Exactly, and what role his building of infrastructure and what he did was in the back and forth. But there's a lot of negotiations, a lot of trying to make sure this doesn't happen, because it was very clear that Japan's military was the main power in Japan, and they were hungry for blood. Well, they were hungry for resources, but that meant that Manchuria would be the next place to conquer after Korea. And I have another quote from Zhang Xueliang from his negotiations with Japanese officials. Apparently, Zhang was very much not swayed by Japan. So I remember I said Xueliang was getting help from Japan.
Right. Until they killed him.
Exactly. Things flipped. Zhang didn't like Japan already before as established because they wanted to take over Manchuria, but also because they killed his dad.
Yeah, they murdered his father. Right?
It's a lot. So he was still on Chiang's side. Again, he was nominally under Chiang anyway, and while he was still administering his territory, when negotiating with Japan, he was still like, Chiang's the leader of China.
Right.
Like, Manchuria is going to stay in China. They even at one point offered him to be the emperor of Manchuria.
As like a puppet government of Japan.
As a puppet government. But obviously they gave him like the spiel of like, oh, well, you're the rightful leader, and he turned them down. Exactly. He wasn't swayed by it. He knew what Japan was trying to do. Puyi later wouldn't, and he would end up becoming...
There's an Oscar-winning film about that, apparently.
Yeah, Emperor Manchukuo. I mean, the incident I'll talk about later also has a movie about it. Not Oscar-winning as far as I'm aware, but the Xi'an incident, which is much later, which is why he's considered a hero. But during some of these sorry, what are you saying?
Oh, nothing. I'm aware of that a little bit, so I was like, oh, he was there.
Yeah, no, he was there. This is the main reason I'm talking about it. This is why he's known as a hero. But during the negotiations, when they broke down, he was basically explaining to the Japanese that they wanted the infrastructure back. Like, they wanted the ports. I think the terms of the agreement from all the unequal treaties with China, with Manchuria, were running out. So the ports and the railroad were supposed to go back to Chinese administration,
right,
or something of that sort. And Japanese were not willing to give that up. Quote, apparently, according to Zhang, they said, "We won them by war. If you want them back, you will have to win them back by war."
Ooh.
Strong words.
Very strong words. The fighting words.
Exactly. Fighting words. Exactly. So the Manchurian incident occurs, which is in itself a complicated series of events that I'll oversimplify. Basically, the Kwantung Army blew up their own railroad this time. Apparently, it wasn't even that big of an explosion, but they blew up the South Manchuria Railroad. They blamed it on,
the Manchurian.
Exactly, on the Chinese, on the Manchurian. It was near I think an army base of some kind, and they took it as a pretext to invade Manchuria and occupy it. And then very quickly, Japan, because Zhang Xueliang was not actually in Manchuria at the time, I believe, but he wasn't there. And so even when he did learn about it, he wanted them not to fight because he saw no use in it because they were just invading Manchuria. They weren't invading all of China.
Right.
They didn't want to lose too many men over it. He basically decided to give up his territory to Japan for the sake of ideally de-escalating the situation.
And avoiding a full-on war with like Chiang Kai-shek's government. And
Well, yeah, exactly, between Chiang Kai-shek's government and the Japanese. So because of this, he loses territory. Now it's not just nominally, he is a general under Chiang Kai-shek. While he has his own interests, and we'll see later that there's still a bit of, acting in his own interest, he does end up just being part of the Kuomintang. And one of his first tasks as a general of the Kuomintang is to participate in the anti-bandit campaigns, is to destroy the Communist Party, which at that point was in the Yan'an territory, fairly small territory, but after the Long March, that's where they ended up. They established themselves pretty well there, and despite the Japanese invasion, Chiang Kai-shek really wanted the communists destroyed. And he had an explicit policy which was internal pacification first, then fighting foreign threats.
You're just very ideologically motivated, or
that it's very hard to tell.
You can't know
motivations.
Right? Yeah,
Again, I keep repeating
it's a person,
that,
you can't know.
But he was very committed to destroying communists.
Okay.
Before fighting back against the Japanese, which is not ideal when you want a unified China. Right. Zhang is a lot of things happen between now and then, but the important thing that happens next is that he gets placed in Xi'an, which is a city close to the communist territory from within the Kuomintang's territory. And he kind of gets sick of fighting other Chinese people.
Okay.
Like, he has quotes saying that, like, it makes him really sad, and that he just...
Well, it fits into his character as far as I can tell here, of wanting a unified China more than to kill communists. He's not as ideologically as opposed. He
saw this united China being under Chiang Kai-shek, but he really hated how much Chiang Kai-shek would try to fight
other Chinese people.
Especially the communists.
Right, as opposed to dealing with like foreign threats like the Japanese.
Exactly. It's not ideal. And he gets so upset about this to the point that he decides to meet with representatives of the Communist Party, one of which is Zhou Enlai. And these meetings happen very often. Obviously, Chiang Kai-shek does not know about them.
Yeah, because
the rest of the Kuomintang army should not know about these. But he's basically even pleading with the Chinese Communist Party to, like, get a deal going. He's like, all right, I understand you guys don't trust Chiang Kai-shek, but he is the only way we're going to get a united China at this point. He's so powerful. You guys aren't as powerful, but if you could just work together, then things would be so much easier. Eventually, Zhou Enlai, who's the main person that he meets with, is like very cool with this. Because, again, the Communist Party wants to create a democracy as one of the stages towards a communist utopia. But as time goes on, they have to respond to Chiang Kai-shek's antagonism, right?
Well, yeah, because he keeps sending men to hunt them down and to kill them, right?
Exactly. So I have a quote here from the third meeting of Zhou Enlai and Zhang. And here it says, Zhang asks Zhou, "Are you really going to fight the Japanese?" Zhou says yes. Zhang asks, "Are you going to do this by anti-Xiang, anti-Japan?" Zhou says yes. Zhang says, "Then please let me leave or kill me." Zhou says, "Why?" And then Zhang says, "Neither your campaign, anti-Chiang, nor Chairman Chiang's campaign, anti-communist, would work. The Japanese military will wait for neither campaign." And then Zhang apparently starts to cry. Zhang in his interview says that there's a lot of crying going on in a lot of these situations, which is...
is that like embellishment likely?
I don't know. It's hard to read. It's probably very emotional. I don't know if they
I'm sure.
cried. But Zhang likes to say that Zhou cries and that he cried. He's even very willing to say that he cried, which is why I find that interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Because it'd be funny if it was only the other people would cry whenever he'd speak. He's just that emotionally compelling as a speaker.
Exactly. So, yeah, Zhou says in tears, "What should we do then? Zhang replies, the best way is to form a national united front under support Shang anti-Japan. And then Zhou says, I do not feel like supporting Shang. Zhang says, then will going along with Chang do? Not supporting him, but going along with him. And then Zhou replies, all right. So Zhang is constantly just trying to get these two sides together. So he finally gets an agreement from Zhou, despite all the stuff that's going on, that, okay, if Shang agrees to it and they want to work together, we will work together to fight the Japanese. Because the Japanese, at this point, are a major threat. They're definitely going to invade. They're already invading China by this point, like mainland China, outside of just Manchuria. Zhang begs Chiang Kai-shek multiple times, including with someone named Yang Hucheng, who becomes important later. Please stop his anti-communism policy. Like, please. I think he begs 3 or 4 times to him personally. Chiang refuses all the time. And then Zhang, in his interview, explains how then he sees Chiang Kai-shek give like a speech to, I think it was the military academy, and talking about how like he's super anti-communist and the communists should be destroyed and all that. And he says in that moment, Zhang realizes like, oh crap,
there will be no peace.
There is no convincing Chiang Kai-shek to work with the communists. He's too sure of his own position. Sorry, continue.
I was gonna say, I think to me, anyways, that's indicative of the fact that it's not a strategic move. He just really hates communists.
I mean, I think there is also a way to think of it as strategic, in the sense that
it's eliminating like a subversive element in
exactly.
China. Yeah.
He wants the Kuomintang to win. He wants the Nationalist Party to be on top later, and he has more importance for that than. And he's certain that he would be able to squash the communists before he has to go fight the Japanese.
And maybe that's short-sighted looking back, but I mean,
exactly.
maybe at the time,
considering the communists won, like
that'd be obviously incredibly short-sighted.
Exactly, and also ideologically, he was also just very anti-communist at the same time. So there's both at play.
We also know that the Japanese launched a full-scale invasion. I don't know if that was. I mean, it was probably obvious that it was going to happen.
Yeah, this is exactly what happens. I think it's definitely by this point. There's a full-on invasion, which is after 1931, so briefly after Manchuria. But anyway, the war is already on at this point. All this begging to work together. Chiang is still committed to anti-communism when Japan is literally invading very speedily.
I feel like that changes the game a little bit, though.
Because
if you're being actively invaded, I think it is a short-sighted move. But maybe again, I'm not a leader of a country. I'm not the leader
I don't know.
of China.
He's playing some 4D chess. But anyway, February 26th incident occurs, which is something that happens in Japan. Basically, the Japanese military attempt to coup the civilian government to install, basically make sure that it's a military dictatorship, because the civilian government still does exist, even it's very pro-military. It's just not pro-military enough. So, like, they assassinate the prime minister, do a bunch of stuff. It doesn't end up succeeding, but the message is sent. The military runs the show. Yeah. They're invading China. They're going all in. Like, this is way before Pearl Harbor, all that stuff. So while they're in China, they're not like fully involved in the wider World War. I mean, the World War hasn't even occurred yet. Well, has it?
What year is this?
In 1936.
No.
Yeah.
Well, the annexation of Austria.
Right. Well, I mean,
like it's the
aggression is happening.
The rumblings in Europe.
Exactly. But there's still already a full-scale invasion of China.
Yeah.
China is being invaded. That's just what's happening. And in Xi'an, in December of that same year, visit Xi'an to basically see how the anti-communism campaign is going. Like, he's still very concerned so much that he personally is showing up to make sure that it's all going.
Wait, he's personally showing up?
Yeah, Xi'an, which is where
where they're fighting.
Zhang is fighting. It's also where he's meeting with Communist Party officials.
He's there. He's watching.
Exactly. And on December 9th, this I'll just explain the events because this is when the Xi'an incident occurs. December 9th. There's a student demonstration, and it's Chiang Kai-shek basically orders to shoot the students.
Okay,
this is a very big event because it's kind of it's a not a celebration, but it's like in remembrance of a different December 9th demonstration which occurred before, and a lot of these are university students from now Japanese occupied cities. It's like a very big deal because Chiang Kai-shek is in that city. A lot of students come from outside of Xi'an to go there to protest, to speak to Chiang Kai-shek personally. Chiang Kai-shek is like, shoot the students.
Really, listen, a real man of the
Yeah,
people.
man of the people.
Really listens to the concerns of his constituents.
And Zhang, who, while yes, under Chiang Kai-shek, still leads his Northeastern Army personally, because he's still personally respected among the soldiers. He's still well-liked generally.
He's got
Zhang orders his
reputation.
army to protect the students. So there's this tension going on. And in the back of his mind, he's remembering this plan he had with someone I mentioned before, Yang Hu Cheng, to hatch a scheme, if you will. And on December 11th, he meets with his generals to make this plan, actually do it. And he knows if he does this plan well, if he fails on this plan, he will be executed.
Like for treason.
For treason. Yeah. And if he succeeds, he may also be executed.
For treason, oh.
He is fully aware. He's fully prepared to die for this, but he so much wants this civil war to pause at least, to fight the Japanese, that he's willing to basically sacrifice his own life to have this happen. And so he decides to kidnap Chiang Kai-shek.
Oh, yes, I've heard of this, yes. I've heard of this incident.
Yeah. So it's to kidnap Chiang Kai-shek, basically. And surprisingly enough, they actually are able to justify this. Well, their plan to justify this to themselves, obviously, but to justify it also to the wider public, is that this is actually kind of part of a tradition. This has only happened 2 or 3 times in Chinese history before. I have the word for it here.
Is it an obscure legal tradition or political?
It's a political tradition, I'd say, more than a legal one. But I think I think they call it binjiang. It should be binjiang, which is the idea of kidnapping. It would be the emperor, because there's always the emperor.
Obviously.
To basically force him to institute a policy and then letting him go, which has happened 2 or 3 times before in Chinese history. And their plan is basically to do that. Their plan isn't to kill Chiang Kai-shek. It's not to do anything. It's to kidnap him, force him to make an agreement with the communists.
And then let him go. At which point he would probably execute them for treason.
That's the thought, is that he might want to do that. But if they're very successful, maybe they won't.
Yeah, right. Maybe if it works out so well, he just won't be able to. They'll be too popular.
Exactly. So they do it December 12th, early in the morning. There's this whole story of how Chiang Kai-shek, I think he didn't get his fake teeth in yet. And so he notices the soldiers trying to kidnap him. So he runs around. He runs outside, realizes he's surrounded, falls into a ditch and a cave. And then they catch him. It's fairly easy. He had his guard down because he thought he was, surrounded by his own troops.
Yeah.
But
apparently not.
Yeah, apparently not. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on the day by day for this, because in terms of time, I'm already going over time a lot.
How long does this kidnapping last? How long did they have him held hostage?
They have him held hostage until December 26th.
Okay.
Well, December 25th is when they put him on plane to Nanjing, and then he arrives 26th. So it's 13 days, basically. But through all this, there's a lot of meetings, obviously, between Zhang, Enlai, other communist officials, and Chiang Kai-shek. And there's also a lot of different accounts on what exactly happened. Because, Zhou Enlai, the communist, had this kind of 8-point demands that he wanted to bring to Chiang Kai-shek to be we need these demands met to work together.
Yeah.
Whether or not these are agreed to is part of what's not certain.
It's what's unclear.
Exactly. But his 8 points were, first, to reorganize the Nanjing government so that all political parties and groups can take part in it and assume responsibility for national salvation. 2, to suspend the civil war all over the country and adopt a policy for united anti-Japanese resistance. 3, to immediately release the 7 national salvation intellectual leaders who were arrested in Shanghai. So these are just intellectual leaders who Chiang Kai-shek arrested. 4, release all the political prisoners in China. 5, liberate the people's patriotic movements. So Chinese Communist Party, basically.
Re-legalize it?
Yeah. To guarantee all the political freedoms and rights of the people, as well as freedom of assembly and association. To ensure compliance with the will of Sun Yat-sen. It's very much an appeal to that, because also the Chinese Communist Party does see Sun Yat-sen as one of their forefathers.
They're trying to appeal to a common ancestry almost.
Exactly. And to immediately convene a National Salvation Congress. So, according to different accounts, most accounts seem to agree that Chiang Kai-shek basically informally agrees
He goes, yeah, sure, but he doesn't sign anything or.
Yeah, and that, again, that's the part where it's unclear because there's like 3 different accounts in the book that I mentioned earlier.
And no doubt it's all very politically motivated.
Yeah, especially today. Also, like the results of that meeting, there's the Chinese archives, but I don't know how much information is there, and it's not really publicly accessible. Very difficult to tell exactly what happened. But by December 24th, there is an agreement made.
Mm-hmm.
And December 25th, Zhang by himself suddenly decides, I'm going to let him go. He's like, this is enough. Whatever. Like even the person I mentioned earlier, Yang Hucheng, is like, why?
Like, why did you do that?
We need to hold on to him more.
We're not done.
We didn't get enough like agreement out of him. But one important thing to mention is that during this whole fiasco, the Japanese are actually the ones who find out about it and spread the news to the world.
Because it's a...
So they kind of seize upon the opportunity to be like, look what they're doing to themselves. Like, they kidnapped the...
I imagine that's quite demoralizing if you're fighting the Japanese.
Right.
Though.
So a lot of, like, during this event, Zhang at one point goes, like, on the radio to, like, explain himself. To be like, listen, we're holding on to him for a bit.
But a good reason.
Exactly. It's for a really good reason. And we're going to let him go. So I'm assuming, you can only hold on, like... kidnap the head of your government
with the whole thing collapsing for so long.
Yeah, so while it seems like Yang thought that they could hold on to him for a while, Zhang is also the leader of this whole scheme. So he's like, okay, sure. So they decide to fly him to Nanjing from Xi'an, and Xi'an is like further out west. So they decide to fly him there, and Zhang decides to accompany him, and he knows that he's not going to come back. So Zhang, according to the son of Yang, says that he gave over the control of the military to Yang to be like, this is your army now. I'm going to go with Chiang Kai-shek. I have no idea what's going to happen to me. And as soon as he gets to Nanjing, he disappears from public life.
Like he just...
Yeah, for all most people know, well, they don't know.
So he let Chiang Kai-shek go.
Yeah, not only that, but he accompanies him to Nanjing in, like, again, there's also more disagreement about this. The same plane, maybe a different plane following them.
Anyways,
unclear.
He arrives, and that's the last we hear of him.
And that's the last we hear of him. I mean, the public hears of him for a while. What basically happened is that as soon as they got to Nanjing, Chiang Kai-shek put him in house arrest.
Yeah.
So, not execution. They didn't kill him. I think it's because by that point, even most people liked the idea of a united front against Japan.
Right.
So executing, again, there is still this tradition. And in this tradition, the people who did the kidnapping would usually punish themselves, wouldn't necessarily be executed. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why they also appeal to that tradition. But he doesn't get killed. And he gets put under house arrest. And this is in 1936. When do you think he is released? Well, I'm going to
say when the communists win in 49. No? How about like the 60s?
Nope.
70s?
Nope.
80s?
Nope.
Whole 90s?
Mm-hmm.
When he's like 100 years old, basically?
In 1991. Because the thing is...
My man got to see the collapse of the Soviet Union from his house arrest. That's crazy.
Exactly. He was held by the Kuomintang into Taiwan.
That's what I'm saying. They bring him to Taiwan.
They brought him to Taiwan to keep him under house arrest.
And like even after Chiang Kai-shek died, no one was like, well, I mean, what's the harm? Like this is so...
No, he was kept under house arrest. I'm not too familiar with the exact situation around why. Again, this is all kept out of the public eye.
Well, for sure, yeah.
But he was held... let me just make sure what age he was by the time he got out.
Well, I imagine if he was the ruler of Manchuria in the 20s, he got out.
He was in his early 20s at that time as well.
Right. So he's probably born in the 1900s.
He was born 1901.
So he 90 years old.
90 years old. He was finally out of house arrest.
This poor guy.
And just to be clear, he dies in 2001.
This man saw...
So he lived another 10 years.
This man lived the entirety of the 90s.
And he also died October 15th, which means he may have known about 9/11.
That's a crazy life though to live from.
Yeah.
Was it 1901? He lived the entire 20th century.
Exactly.
He died exactly 100 years.
Exactly. No, he lived throughout the entire.
Oh, I would love to know what you think about all that, but he was under house arrest.
He was under house arrest for a lot of it, but I mean, he seemed to have known like what was going on. And afterwards, he gave like a lot of interviews and stuff, and talked about like what happened from his view.
Did he like go on TV? Can you find interviews?
Yeah, he got interviewed by the NHK, which is the Japanese national broadcasting
company.
So like he lived around. He lived in like Hawaii for the most part, but he also visited Japan, and he comments a lot on like how different Japan was.
Well,
Like
for
when he
sure,
went
it's been what 80 years since
Exactly.
he was put under house, or a little less than that. But
Yeah, which he talks about that just like when he visited in the 20s.
Right.
He's like, it was very different then. Like Japan was very different then.
the
Which,
whole world was very different then.
exactly, but
Oh man, what do you think of anime?
I don't know if he knew what that was, but yeah. So 1991, he comes out of house arrest,
That's a wild
and
story.
he just lives the rest of his life, mostly in Hawaii, but in other places too. And yeah, so
I really wonder what his legacy is like in communist China, like today.
that
Like
I
how
don't know.
if they teach about him
I
at
know
all.
the buffs, in China generally consider him a hero, especially among the communists, because he did work with the communists.
yeah.
Despite he was in a sense a traitor to the Kuomintang, and working with the Chinese.
He was
Communist
helping
Party.
mediate, so I would imagine he's viewed kind of favorably
He's
because of that.
most likely he's definitely viewed favorably, especially because of his self-sacrifice.
Mm-mm.
Because again, say what you will about his personal power, he was again basically a prince.
But he gave himself up to potential execution
He
and
gave
definite
him-
house arrest.
Exactly, he gave himself up, so he lost like any ability to basically do anything in the public eye from 1936 to 1991, which is almost 60 years. He gave up like 55 years
of his
of his life for a united China.
I wonder what the modern KMT. They're still a party, right?
Yep.
I wonder
In
what
Taiwan.
I wonder what his legacy is in Taiwan, though.
That is an even better question, actually.
Because
I don't know.
I can see how the communists would view him favorably, but I don't know. To me, he seems sympathetic, but I'm not. I'm not.
Well, I
nowhere
can't
near.
considering the fact they kept them under house arrest
I'm gonna guess
for a long time.
Well, he also did kidnap the guy that's their founder and the leader.
Yeah,
of the
but
country.
he did so in the interest of China.
Yeah,
I'm not saying necessarily Taiwanese people would see it that way, but
that's the thing. I don't know. I do wonder. It's a good question.
yeah,
What an interesting guy, though. I'm surprised he survived that long.
yeah.
I would have thought he would. Well, I mean, you told me he lived, obviously, but otherwise, I would have assumed he would have just been executed when he released Chiang Kai. I wonder what that flight was like. That conversation on the way back.
I mean, if there was a conversation,
if there was a conversation,
according to Zhang, he was actually like in a plane, like right behind him, basically,
or even when he let him
like
go,
escorting him from outside of the plane. Like
there must have been a moment when he let him go or something.
yeah, again, that's another thing where it's interesting because I said like there's different accounts of the meetings during the Xi'an incident. Zhang himself refuses to say what happened during those meetings.
I wonder why.
I mean, he actually says the reason. He says, first of all, he said, like, I'm not the kind of person to praise myself. That was his second reason. He was like, I'm not going to say what happened and pretend like I'm a big hero because there's a lot of people involved, all that stuff. But he also said, like, it would hurt the image of a lot of different people if I said what happened during the meeting.
I assume it was because it's behind closed doors. He doesn't want to
Yeah, and considering he'd been under house arrest for 55 years, he probably didn't want to accept the Kuomintang even more than...
or the Chinese Communist
or
Party.
the Chinese Communist Party, for that matter.
And I imagine it would, he's so committed to national
Yeah.
unity that he doesn't want to...
Although there is still a lot of accounts from many different parties. Like there's the account from... actually, there was a Chinese student leader who would later become part of the Communist Party who actually ended up living and dying in Canada, funny enough, who was in the meeting, who says, along with an American witness and a Japanese witness...
Okay, so there's only one Chinese... None of the other leaders wrote about
No,
this?
there's a bunch of...
Okay.
Again, the meeting was secret. The whole thing about like the...
But I mean,
the
did the
final
other-
informal meeting...
Did the other leaders there write about it at all and give an account? Like the communist leaders?
I'm assuming like Zhou and Enlai probably gave a report to the Communist Party that was kept really hush-hush.
But I'm saying, like, nowadays, is that accessible at all?
Well, the accounts I just told you about are accessible.
But that's what I mean. Like, is there, like, an official Communist Party?
There is no official account of what happened, according to the Chinese. Again, in 2011, the Chinese state archives got closed off. And
Okay.
even then, before that, there was very limited access. So there's generally not much accessibility from, like,
so there might be,
the
but
official
it's
position of the
probably
Communist point of view.
it's
right?
probably buried deep in a vault somewhere.
Exactly. The state's like view of things, they probably have like an official position on what happened, but the official account, like an account
That was
they stand
given to
by,
them. Yeah, it's not,
as far as I'm aware, was
that's a shame. Maybe one day. We did eventually
Maybe.
get access to the Soviet archives and to
Yeah,
these
but it did
journalists.
take the collapse of the Soviet Union. I don't see China going through that anytime
True.
soon.
Maybe they'll get a more open government at some point. That's more willing to look into their
put your
past.
money on that. People put money on elections.
I'm
money
not
on
a
anything.
betting man, especially on politics.
But
That is a fascinating story, though. I did not know about
yeah,
this guy.
I mean, it kind of went all over the place. So I apologize if that was hard to keep up with.
No,
but
it's all right. That's half the fun is the little tangents.
Yeah, it's just that's why it's so difficult to speak about the Chinese Civil War. Is that even if you want to talk about one guy, you have to
The 30 other guys around him.
Exactly, and the parties and the context and what was happening in Japan at the time and how other Chinese agents were affecting the situation. But I think that should give you an interesting perspective on the Chinese Civil War from a certain perspective. There's so many other perspectives, especially from one of the actual main players. Like, if I could probably told you about the career of Chiang Kai-shek, and that probably
or Mao
would give you a clear
Zedong, or
idea.
any of the big leaders.
To give you a much clearer idea of the Civil War. But I really wanted to talk about, mostly I wanted to talk about the Xi'an incident at the time, but then I realized Zhang Xueliang himself was such an interesting figure, and I did see that he lived for so long, and he gave like these interviews, and he has a very interesting take on what occurred throughout those years. And I also just think it's interesting to be born in 1901, become the warlord of Manchuria in like your mid-20s, and then just
kidnap
kidnap
the
Chiang
president
Kai-shek.
of China. I think he's a president or premier or whatever, the head of China.
Yeah.
Be like, you have to negotiate with the communists.
Exactly. Have it actually work, because after this, while Chiang Kai-shek wasn't friendly with the communists necessarily, a lot of the efforts did kind of die down in favor of fighting the Japanese.
Right.
Especially, that was a lot of it was also like American pressure, because the American support Soviet pressure as well, because even after that point, the Soviets still mostly aided the Kuomintang more than the CCP. So, in a way, it kind of worked, because it also, there's a lot of like questions about how exactly this changed things. Like, did it really make Chiang Kai-shek commit to a policy? Was it that it kind of put public pressure on him to follow through with
like
a second
would he have done
front?
this either way, or like we'll never know, but
exactly, we'll never know. But this incident is definitely like a point that changes things.
Right. It
Given the secrecy of the meeting, we'll never exactly know how. Well, maybe not never. We don't exactly know how, but it definitely did change things. And this could only be done with someone who had enough power, enough basically charisma, and also enough drive and commitment to this goal.
And despite all
As
that, was willing to give up potentially his life, and he was in prison.
I mean, according to him, he said like he was ready to give up his life.
Because that's what I would have assumed would have happened to him, that he would have been shot.
Again, because he says like, if I failed, like he says also, he apparently said this to his officer. He's like, if we fail, we get executed. If we succeed, we might not get it. Like,
we may still get executed. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, the fact that he survived until 2001 is also just something I find very interesting.
Yeah, that's an impressive life.
Again, he lived during 9/11.
I wonder how much if he had like a TV and like contact with the outside world. Do you think he was kind of aware of what was going on?
I mean, I'd imagine, again, it's described as house arrest.
And they must slack off on him after the 50th year or
something,
something.
He probably just couldn't leave the country, couldn't leave like a certain perimeter.
Probably
I'd imagine he could
get involved
still,
in politics. Or
especially by the 90s, I'd imagine he'd have access to a television.
Yeah, it's probably just like, don't make public statements, don't get yourself involved in politics. And I think it's funny they took them with him though. I would have.
That's also what I find interesting, because what kind of like glosses over it, where they're like, yeah, he's
important enough to take with us.
He's imprisoned in China, and then they bring him with them to Taiwan, which makes me wonder if it was like Zhang like maybe accepted it. I don't think he would though. So I don't know what the situation is.
Yeah, I do wonder, because what would have happened if he had what would the Chinese communist? I'm curious what they would do if they came upon him in his house arrest. Would he just keep him?
I mean, the communists liked him. So.
I think they would have. That's what I mean. I think they would have set him free. Do you think it's an element of like, we just don't want him running around?
I don't know. It's really hard to tell.
It's all speculation. But
yeah, it's all speculation at that point. But anyway,
clearly we can't ask him anymore, unfortunately.
Unfortunately,
what a crazy podcast.
I was born too late. Yeah, here is former warlord
of Manchuria and centenarian.
Yeah, centenarian and also hero of the Chinese Civil War. Somehow, Zhang Xueliang. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I'll talk about the Chinese Civil War in the next few podcast episodes. I think I'm probably going to get away from it, because just doing this episode made me realize how much of a...
We should return sometime, though.
I'm definitely going to return. I think this just has given me like more ideas on how to explore it and how to bring more, let's say, Anglosphere awareness to the Chinese Civil War, and like the complexities of it, and how no war is like certain. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the communists were not destined to win the Civil War. There was a lot of different factors, a lot of different people, a lot of different interests, a lot of different foreign external factors as well.
Yeah.
And Zhang Xueliang was just one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't for him, maybe Chiang Kai-shek would have crushed the communists. Maybe not.
Maybe they would have got defeated by the Japanese. They would
Maybe.
have been too busy fighting each other. Who knows? Honestly.
Exactly. It's really difficult to tell, but it is a story worth telling regardless. And I'm glad you found it interesting.
Yeah, I found that really fascinating.
Yeah. So I think this one ran quite long. There was a lot to explain, and hopefully I did it well enough. And yeah, I guess we should sign off.
Yep.
All right. We'll see you later.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.